Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is scrolling through their phone at midnight, unable to sleep, heart beating just a little too fast, and they don't quite know why. Maybe you felt it, that low, quiet hum of dread that doesn't have a name. Most people blame stress, or anxiety, or too much caffeine. But what if that feeling is actually millions of years old? What if the fear keeping you awake tonight was never really about the dark, or the deadline, or any of the things you think it's about? Because here's the thing, after decades of studying ancient human fossils, archaeological sites, and the deepest wiring of the human brain, scientists arrived at a conclusion so simple and so strange that it completely changed the story of what our ancestors feared most. For nearly 200,000 years, Homo sapiens lived without cities, without medicine, without police, without even the concept of a locked door. And yet they survived. Ice ages, droughts that swallowed entire landscapes, predators with teeth the size of your forearm. Somehow, against every odd stacked against them, they endured. What was the single thread holding all of that survival together? It wasn't sharper weapons, it wasn't greater strength. It was something far more fragile and far more powerful. Every night when darkness fell, survival depended on staying connected to the people around you. Lose that connection, and suddenly every danger became far more dangerous. The archaeological record leaves little room for doubt about the world our ancestors lived in. In 1981, archaeologist C.K. Brain published The Hunters, or The Hunted, examining fossil evidence from South African cave sites occupied by early humans. The bones carried unmistakable signatures of predation. Leopard tooth marks, hyena damage, broken skulls. These weren't rare accidents. Early humans were often prey. The fear of glowing eyes beyond the firelight wasn't imagination, it was reality. Every trip away from the group carried the possibility of never returning. So perhaps that's the answer. Predators, lions, hyenas, the darkness itself. It certainly feels that way. But here's where the story begins to fall apart. Joseph Ledoux, whose groundbreaking work on the neuroscience of fear reshaped how scientists understand survival, argued that fear is far more sophisticated than a simple reaction to immediate physical danger. The human brain isn't designed merely to detect claws, teeth, or sudden movement. It constantly evaluates something much harder to see, the conditions that make survival possible in the first place. Sometimes the greatest threat isn't the thing trying to kill you. It's the thing that leaves you vulnerable to everything else. And archaeology quietly supports that idea. Across prehistoric sites, researchers have uncovered skeletons of individuals who suffered devastating injuries, broken legs, crushed hips, severe disabilities, yet survived for years after the trauma occurred. Some lost the ability to hunt. Others could barely walk. On their own, they almost certainly would have died within days. Yet they lived long enough for broken bones to heal, sometimes into old age. Someone carried them, someone fed them, someone protected them when they could no longer protect themselves. That evidence changes the question completely. Instead of asking what ancient humans were afraid of, we have to ask what they could never afford to lose. The answer begins to emerge through one of the most influential ideas in evolutionary anthropology. Robin Dunbar, the psychologist behind the social brain hypothesis, argued that the remarkable expansion of the human brain wasn't driven primarily by tool-making or hunting. It was driven by relationships, remembering faces, building trust, managing alliances, knowing who would share food, who could be relied upon, and who might abandon you when survival became difficult. As human social groups grew larger, the neocortex grew alongside them. In other words, our most extraordinary organ may have evolved not simply to outsmart nature, but to navigate each other. And if that was true, then perhaps the greatest danger our ancestors faced wasn't meeting a predator. It was facing one alone. Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary pushed that idea even further. In 1995, they published what became one of the most influential papers in social psychology, The Need to Belong. Their conclusion was surprisingly bold. The need to belong, they argued, is not simply a desire for companionship or acceptance. It is a fundamental biological motivation, as deeply rooted as hunger or thirst. For most of human history, separation from the group wasn't emotionally uncomfortable. It was evolutionarily catastrophic. A person alone couldn't reliably hunt, defend a campsite, care for an injury, or stay awake every hour of the night. The group wasn't merely a source of comfort. It was the environment in which human life was possible. Think about what that means. Every emotion that pulled our ancestors back toward the people around them, every feeling of loneliness, every fear of rejection, every desperate need to reconnect, may have been protecting them from a danger far older than civilization itself. For hundreds of thousands thousands of years, this invisible rule shaped nearly every human life. Stay with the group or accept odds that became dramatically worse. Then, around 12,000 years ago, another transformation began. Farming slowly replaced constant migration. Villages grew into permanent settlements. Communities expanded into towns and eventually cities. The world became increasingly structured, and survival no longer depended every day on a small hunting band moving together across the landscape. Many of the immediate dangers changed, yet evolution moves far more slowly than civilization. The world transformed in a few thousand years. The human brain had been shaped across hundreds of thousands, and perhaps that is why our oldest survival systems still speak so loudly. In 2003, neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger, Matthew Lieberman, and Kipling Williams tested an idea that sounded almost impossible. What happens inside the brain when someone experiences social rejection? Using functional MRI scans, they discovered that being excluded from a simple social game consistently activated regions of the brain associated with physical pain, particularly the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. The brain wasn't treating rejection as a symbolic disappointment, it was responding as though something important to survival had been damaged. Suddenly, feelings that seem irrational begin to make sense. Why does being ignored linger in your mind for hours? Why can betrayal hurt long after a physical injury has healed? Why does loneliness sometimes feel almost tangible? Because to the oldest parts of the human brain, exclusion was never just an emotion. It was a warning. A signal that one of the greatest dangers our ancestors could face might be approaching. What if the most powerful force in human evolution wasn't strength or sharper weapons or even greater intelligence? What if it was the quiet, relentless drive to remain part of something larger than ourselves? The instinct to notice every strained relationship, to repair broken trust, to seek companionship after isolation, to feel pain when we were pushed away. Perhaps those weren't emotional weaknesses at all. Perhaps they were among the greatest survival adaptations our species ever evolved. Tonight, when the lights go out, no leopard will be waiting beyond the edge of the firelight. No hyena will circle your campsite. The ancient savanna has faded into history, but somewhere inside your brain, the oldest survival code is still awake, still watching. Still asking the same question it has asked for hundreds of thousands of years. Am I still with my people? Our ancestors didn't survive because they feared everything. They survived because evolution taught them to fear the one thing that made every other danger infinitely worse, being left behind. That ancient fear held families together, held tribes together, and, in time, helped build civilizations. The next time rejection stings or loneliness settles quietly into your chest, remember this: you are feeling the echo of one of humanity's oldest survival instincts, not a flaw. A message from a world where belonging was the difference between life and death.